Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon and joining us for a very special presentation. We're honored to have Ara Levy here, who is representing the European Union. He is, I'm going to make sure I get your title correct, Deputy Head for Science, Technology, and Education for the Permanent European Union Delegation to the U.S. based in Washington, D.C., but he's spending the week out here in California, primarily visiting UC institutions because we have such a rich array of prospective researchers and partners to participate in the Horizon 2020 program. He's joined by Michael Kuziak from the University of California Office of the President, also in the research division, and can make a short introduction of themselves as well. So we're pleased not only to welcome the folks who are here in person, but also our web viewers, and I want to thank the Citrus staff who arranged to have this live webcast at our partner campuses at Merced, Davis, and Santa Cruz, as well as at UCSF. The remarks today will also be recorded and available for viewing later as well. I know that the Horizon 2020 program is quite comprehensive with many parts to it, so I'm sure that this will be a valuable resource for all of us to refer back to make sure that we're getting all the details right. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Mr. Ara Levy.
Great. So thanks very much to Camille and to David Lindemann and colleagues for making it possible for me to address you. I'm excited to be here because I'm stuck in Washington, D.C. I work as part of a small team that works to develop relationships between the EU and the United States on all areas of science, technology, research, and innovation. And so we try to get out of the Beltway as much as possible to engage with universities and researchers, research administrators, entrepreneurs, innovators, small companies, big companies. Part of a small team. I'm the Deputy Head of Science, Technology and Education. As such, I'm a science counselor or a research and innovation counselor in the fashionable vernacular. And we work with US government departments that fund science, of which there are a couple of dozen. We work with university and industry associations and individual universities and companies and researchers indeed. So we get stretched a little thin, and we work with research administrators like Mike here to let you all become aware of what opportunities there are for research funding and collaboration with Europeans. So I'm excited to be here. Like Camille said, it's University of California Week. In the predecessor program to the Horizon 2020 program that I'm going to be telling you about, the University of California collectively, the system collectively, is the single most successful US organization in our programs. The field is so fertile for transatlantic cooperation, and the University of California is the most successful. Having said that, I think the majority of UC researchers, as well as the majority of researchers in the US, are not really aware of what there is to offer, what the Horizon 2020 program is, what European Union level funding is about, and what possibilities there are for us to work together. So that's what I'm going to be addressing. So I'm going to give you an overview of the Horizon 2020 program. How is it structured? How large is it? What opportunities are there? And then I want to say a little bit about how the US fares in what our ambitions are for the US in Horizon 2020, and give you an idea of what US participation has been in previous programs. I'm going to allow, Mike has kindly offered to say something about how the University of California approaches its collaboration with us at European level, and give you some tips as to how to smooth and facilitate the process. And then I'm going to say something about the actual application process, just to give you an idea of what it takes to actually get involved and take advantage of the opportunities available. Now, the last time I gave this presentation in Mike's presence, at the end of the presentation, he said to me, well, why don't you add a slide that actually tells people about the European Union? And my first reaction was like, really? People need to know it's like 28 member states? But then I thought, yeah, he's right. I think it's well worth doing that. What is it worthwhile knowing? I mean, okay, we have 7% of the world's population at 500 million, but we account for 25%, nearly a quarter, of the expenditure on science and research. We account for a third of the high-impact publications and, again, about a third of the patent applications worldwide. Together with the United States, we're responsible for about half the generation of knowledge on the planet. Having said that, that proportion is shrinking, something we realize very much. The global stock of knowledge is growing, great thing. There is a lot of great science being done increasingly in emerging countries, again, a good thing. While we welcome the increase in knowledge which will enable us to tackle the challenges that we have, we also have to bear in mind our competitiveness. So one of the things that we want to do is to make sure that the best Europeans are working with the best in the rest of the world, so that there is that exchange of best ideas and knowledge and people in order to address those. So the Horizon 2020 program is not the first time that the European Union has been funding research at the European level. It is, in fact, the latest incarnation of a set of programs that have existed since the early 80s, as you can see. And something else that you'll notice is that at European level, the funding available has been increasing. Why? Because there's an increasing realization in Europe that we have to invest in research and innovation in order to address the issue of creating high-quality jobs, increasing economic growth, and addressing our competitiveness. So you'll see that the predecessor programs, all going back to the first framework program, right through to the 7th framework program, which was the predecessor to Horizon 2020, that number's been increasing. The numbers that you see are the annual budget in billions of euros. If you multiply that by about 1.3, by about a third, you get the US dollar amount. And so one of the things new about Horizon 2020 is that its budget has increased absolutely substantially over the previous program, which gives more opportunities for us to do what we need to do to address European policies and develop research and innovation policy, but also gives greater scope for international cooperation, which is an increasingly important part for us of the programs. So what are we talking about? It's about $100 billion US over 7 years. The program was launched at the very end of last year. And it's a program which we're using, as I say, to address jobs, growth, investment, and competitiveness, but also addressing societal challenges in areas that I'll mention a little bit more about later. But we're talking about energy and climate change and transport and food security, things like that. It's a large program, and it's a single program with a single set of rules, but there are different schemes within it, a lot of flexibility, different emphases, which will provide a lot of opportunities, I believe, for you as UC researchers and for our other international partners. Something that I want to emphasize is that the program addresses everything from very basic research right through to the commercialization of ideas through the different projects, topics, programs that I'm going to elaborate for you. And it addresses societal challenges, like I said. It is the most open, large, transnational research program in the world, we claim. Open in the sense that it's open to participants from any nation, any nationality. We want academia to be working with industry. We want NGOs involved. We want the private sector to be working with the public sector. So multidisciplinarity is very much, and multi-sector participation is very much a focus. The program is structured in 3 parts. Excellent science, which is about Europe's capacity to do excellent science, and it's been a long-running theme. It's been a theme of the European Union level programs since the very beginning, since the early 80s, as I said. So we want to address ideas, the best science, also the the capacity of Europe to generate great scientists, to help scientists to develop their career, encourage mobility, have access to world-class infrastructures. Industrial leadership, what's that about? That's about addressing our competitiveness by supporting key research on and innovation on key enabling technologies. So we're talking about information and communication technologies, nanotechnologies, biotechnologies, and all those broad topics that are at the interstices of them both, of all of those. So like I said, interdisciplinary research is something we very much want to encourage. I'll say a little bit more about that later. And societal challenges that I've already mentioned: climate, energy, transport, food security, etc. So let me talk about the excellent science pillar. So it accounts for a large slice of the 80 billion euros, over 100 billion US dollars. So a little bit less than a third. And there are four main areas that we address under excellent science. One is funding basic science by excellent PIs, principal investigators, individual researchers, under the European Research Council grants. It's the nearest thing we have to the way that the National Science Foundation works in funding individuals. And I think there are some very exciting possibilities for those of you in this room, those of you on the other sites, and throughout the University of California system. University of California sites are already active in a lot of the activities under the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, which are training and mobility and career development activities, and I'll say more about what the opportunities are there. Those two I've highlighted in red because they are areas that I particularly want you to know about and where there are opportunities for you. Future and emerging technologies is where we fund large-scale interdisciplinary research in an area that we think exciting breakthroughs are about to happen. And there are two projects, we call them flagship initiatives, that we're funding at the moment. More may be added in the areas of mapping the human brain. It's called the Human Brain Project. It's actually simulating the human brain project. And research into the potential and applications of the material graphene. So that's future and emerging technologies. Then research infrastructures that I mentioned. We want European scientists to have access to world-class infrastructures and to connect those infrastructures to the best infrastructures in the rest of the world. Industrial leadership. I mentioned the key enabling technologies, ICT, nanotechnology, biotechnology, but we also fund advanced manufacturing activities from this part of the program, and space technologies. We use collaborative projects, consortium-based bids in this area. The third main pillar was societal challenges, again where we use collaborative projects. Highlighted in red is that area, health, demographic change, and well-being, because it's in this area of in this societal challenge where routine funding is provided for US researchers who are parts of successful consortium bids, collaborative project proposals. In the other areas, we very much encourage US participation, but funding is not automatically given to the US partner where they're part of a successful bid, and we do, in general, expect US researchers to come with their own funding for those. There are some exceptions, and I will mention what they are in a few minutes. So without going through the list, these are some broad challenges that we've defined, and they are deliberately broad because we want to encourage multidisciplinarity. For those of you who may be social scientists, I get a lot of questions from social scientists saying, do you fund our type of research in Horizon 2020? The answer is emphatically yes. Not only is there a theme dedicated to that called Inclusive, Innovative, and Reflective Societies, but we encourage the mainstreaming of social issues, impacts, attitudes, developments throughout the societal challenges. So we encourage the consortia that form to answer bids to include that social dimension and to include social scientists in addressing the social dimension. This gives you an idea of how the three main pillars are funded as a pie chart. The societal challenges, you can see there, account for about a third, just over a quarter for excellent science, and less than a quarter for industrial leadership. And there are three other smaller slices that you can see there that fund the civil nuclear research, which is called the Euratom program, done intramurally and extramurally. The green portion is funding that goes to a group of scientists within the European Commission, which is my home European Union institution, which is a group of scientists that do research that are particularly relevant to EU policies, Joint Research Centre, and the European Institute of Innovation and Technologies, which is organising itself around what are called knowledge and innovation communities. So that is multi-stakeholder initiatives that are defining strategic research agenda that are being supported by European funding, but are addressing specific topics and products. So, as I said, it's very important to us to have international partners, and for a number of reasons. So we have a generally open policy, as we did for the predecessor program to Horizon 2020. So Horizon 2020 is open to for participation by researchers and organizations of any nationality. The only exceptions that are made are where specific sanctions, for example, may have been imposed for a particular organization named by Europe. But it's open. Why is it open? It's because we realize that science is globalizing. We welcome that and embrace it, and we want to use it for mutual advantage. So these are some of the things that we feel we get out of having an open program and having international research. Some of the reasons there are, well, all of the reasons are also applicable to the United States. And for you as individual researchers, I'd like to point out that, increasingly the profile of a successful a top-level researcher is one who has international contacts, international collaborations. I was told about I was sent a study recently by the OECD, I think it was published in 2013, which states that in terms of high-impact research, it's the international collaborations have 20% more impact than single-country research publications. I was also at an event a few months ago attended by a speaker from a major scientific publisher they have access to millions of research publications. They are doing their own research, and they are very clear about the correlation between international collaboration and increased impact. Now, I can't say for sure whether it's that international mobility and contacts makes for better researchers, or whether the best researchers are the ones that are mobile and have the contacts. I suspect it's a bit of both, but the correlation is clear. So for you as individual researchers, those of you who have the perspective of being at the tops of your fields, this is something that you need to increasingly be aware of and to address in your own careers. So, as I said, we want the best in Europe to work with the best of the rest of the world, and a lot of the researchers in the EUC system are among the very best in the world. So we want to work with you. Let me talk about the particular aspects of the program that may be interesting to you as US researchers and as University of California researchers. One is the European Research Council grants. This has been, it was initiated in the predecessor program to Horizon 2020, called the 7th Framework Program, and it's been a very highly successful initiative, We funded over the 7-year period from 2007 to 2013, something like 4,000 researchers, individual researchers. Basically, funding just the best ideas. The only criteria to succeed is the excellence of the proposal and of the research idea and the excellence of the researcher. So it's flexible. The funding that's available goes to an individual who has autonomy, enables you to establish your own teams and your own facilities and your own laboratories. It allows you to work with those collaborators that you choose to work with. And it also allows you to move your money from one host research institution to another. I'm going to describe what's available. Now, the grant schemes depend on your scientific maturity, in inverted commas. So we have grants, calls for proposals, solicitations, which are aimed at earlier stage researchers. So we call those starting grants for those who are between 2 and 7 years after your PhD, and provide something like $2.5 million or 2 million euros for up to 5 years. The consolidated grants are aimed at those individuals with between 7 and 12 years of research experience after their PhDs, and you have access to something like $3.5 million for up to 5 years, and the advanced grants, which are for those who are clearly beyond the 12 years, but also who have a good track record and achievements within the last 10 years in terms of active research, and can benefit from up to $4.5 million US dollars over 5 years. For existing grantees, there is also a proof of concept grant, which allows you to take your idea as you've developed it to take it to the next stage towards commercialization. And these are essentially top-up grants for those who successfully develop their ideas. So let me say something about the international involvement that we've seen. Up until now, because it's a relatively new program, the numbers are small, but they're growing. And if you look at where the international involvement's coming from, the US is clearly very dominant. In orange there you see the starter and consolidator grants, and the advanced grants in blue, and you'll see that the US is by far the most successful of our non-European grantees. So the numbers are small, and the success rate for US-based researchers, of whatever nationality they actually happen to be as citizenship, is actually large. The success rate is large, and as a proportion of, they actually form something like 45% of all the non-Europeans who are actually grantees. So great possibilities for you there. So what shall I say about that? You would benefit from a grant to yourself, which would require you to spend half of your time working in Europe at a European host institution. And as I say, that grant is portable between European host institutions. When I say European, what do I mean? I mean countries that are one of the 28 EU member states, or one of the countries associated to the Horizon 2020 program, of which there are about 10, we expect about a dozen, when all the agreements are signed in full. So we're talking about countries outside the EU that include Iceland, Norway, Turkey and Macedonia are candidate countries, the Western Balkan countries. Israel is also a full member. Switzerland, at the moment, we're still negotiating the agreement with. And when it comes to the European Research Council grants, Switzerland is included in the program and therefore would count as one of those associated countries. That's for the purposes of the European Research Council grants. So let me tell you about some of the forthcoming calls before I move on to the other areas of the program. You see the deadline for the latest deadline for advanced grants has just gone, but there will be another opening to the tune of 630 million euros opening on the 10th of February of next year, with a deadline for the 2nd of June. So for starting grants, for those of you between 2 and 7 years outside your PhD, a call has been published this month, which will be open until the 3rd of February. And you can see that for those in between, one will open next month with a deadline in March. So European Research Council grants are an opportunity for you as individuals to propose excellent ideas, be selected, receive between $2.5 million and $4.5 million to do work that you want, establishing your labs and working with an EU host institution where you would spend at least half of your time. For those researchers who are advanced, who are successful for the advanced grants, you have to spend half of your time in Europe, but only up to a third of your time, or 30% of your time, actually working on the project for which we have given you the grant. So that's worth knowing. It's also the case that half of your time, which could be, as I say, half of up to 5 years, doesn't have to be contiguous. It doesn't have to be all at the same time. It can be, some period in Europe, some period back here in the United States. And we don't, of course, require you to sever the connections you have with your current institution here in the United States. So let me talk about the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, which is the latest incarnation of what we call the Marie Curie actions, which are a very successful mobility and training activity that we've had at European Union level, and in which the University of California has been a very active participant. So what are we talking about? There are actually a number of schemes benefiting from, in the Horizon 2020 program, over 6 billion euros. So we're talking about something like $8 billion over the 7-year period. And these are the schemes. The ones that would be of most interest to you would be the individual fellowships, the one with the red line. But the others, the innovative training networks and the research and innovation staff exchange schemes, would also be interesting, particularly for research staff and those who want to host Europeans in the US. So individual fellowships allow individual US researchers to receive funding to go to Europe for a period of 1 to 2 years, with their costs provided by a European Union organization or an organization among the associated countries to do research for that period of time. The innovative training networks are about the establishment of networks between organizations that develop training, either purely academic training or training which encourages mobility between sectors and between disciplines. So when I say sectors, I mean between the public and private sector, between disciplines being any discipline. The research and innovation staff exchange schemes are short-term secondment schemes, allowing research staff not necessarily having a PhD to be exchanged for periods typically 3 months. The co-fund scheme is where the European Union funding is put alongside the funding of European Union member states or associated countries that wish to form networks and to encourage mobility between their researchers. And that's something that you might consider that is where there isn't a lot of international cooperation, but where there could be. So, something that is worth you knowing is that unlike the topics that are published for the collaborative research projects, this can be in any area or domain. That's also true of the European Research Council grants, which I should also emphasize. For the European Research Council grants, where the individuals get research funding, any topic can be addressed. We don't specify that. And all domains have been supported, including social sciences, to the extent of something like 20%. So for the Murray Skłodowski-Curie actions, all domains, we very much want to include stakeholders outside the academic field, though of course we do have a lot of participation, in fact mainly participation by universities and research institutes. So we're talking about cross-border mobility, but not only geographic mobility, but mobility between the sectors and disciplines. And between the schemes that I've just described, there's a lot of flexibility to do what the organizations feel benefits them in terms of the exchanges and the research and mobility. We put a lot of emphasis for the funding that we give on making sure that the researcher is taken care of, as in they not only are provided with their research funds, they are provided with funding for the move that they make, for an allowance allowing them to move their families if necessary, looking after their social security and welfare payments. So that's something that we stipulate, and that's something that's very important. Now, the money goes to European or European member state or associated country beneficiaries, where researchers are transferred from Europe to a US organization. We expect that European organization to negotiate with the US organization to make sure that the researchers' costs are paid and that the costs to the institution are covered to the extent that they can negotiate, that they will negotiate. Mike might have something to say about that later on. So these are the schemes. Innovative training networks, which are for doctoral training, largely. Where those training networks are established, they then issue calls for researchers to apply. So you as a researcher could then apply to a call from an innovative training network. Among the individual fellowships, the researcher applies to the European Commission directly as a result of the call that we will issue, and I'll show you where you will find those calls. And there, again, opportunities for you as individual US researchers to be funded. The research and innovation staff schemes are highly competitive. They go in Europe to the top-level PIs and are excellent exchange networks for US organizations who want to work with the best in Europe. And I also mentioned the co-funding of programs. Okay. So, for our international partners, the opportunities are as partner organizations, for US, partner organizations in ITN and RISE. They can send and host researchers on secondments, and they can host researchers in individual fellowships. They're called global fellowships. Okay, nationality is not an issue. Let me move on. Okay, just to say, in the previous program to Horizon 2020, where have our international partners come from? And you can see that, well, in green are the flows of researchers to Europe, and in purple, from Europe. And you'll notice that the US, in terms of researchers that go to Europe, come number 3, behind India and China. So very strong. And in terms of where researchers from Europe go to, it's completely dominated by researchers that go to the United States, and many of them are hosted by the University of California. Okay, so to give you an idea, 9,400 projects financed by these actions in our predecessor program, supporting 50,000 researchers of over 140 nationalities. In the case of the European Research Council grants to individuals that I mentioned earlier, we supported like 4,000 researchers, and we hope in the Horizon 2020 program to support a total of 7,000. So here we supported 50,000, and we expect to support a lot more given the increase in funding that we've been able to access. So where are the upcoming calls? So for you as an individual researcher, you might be particularly interested in the ITN. There's a call open at the moment, closing on the 13th of January. So that's day, month, year. And for the individual fellowships, there's a call opening in March of next year, closing in September of next year. So time to prepare for that. Also next year, there will be an open call for the Research and Innovation Staff Exchange Scheme. So those are particular opportunities that are available for individual researchers in the case of the European Research Council grants, and for individuals and organizations in the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions. So now I'm going to talk, before I move on, about the opportunities for US researchers and organizations in collaborative projects, which are supported under the two pillars of Horizon 2020 that I mentioned earlier, industrial leadership and societal challenges. So we have a general policy of openness, as I mentioned at the beginning. So our projects we encourage international participation by any nation, but at the same time, we also have what we call targeted opening, where some calls for proposals specifically encourage participation by particular countries, by partners from the United States, for example. And in the calls for proposals that have either taken place in 2014 or will take place in 2015, there are about $500 million worth of calls where the US is encouraged to participate. By participation, I mean to be involved, in some cases with funding, in some cases without funding, and I'll tell you what those cases are in a moment. Something else that we're trying to do, and one of my jobs is to work with, as I said, US government departments and agencies in trying to encourage more strategic level and programmatic level research. So we actually also do coordinated calls with agencies in some cases, and we're trying to expand that as much as possible. So a few have been held, a few are ongoing, and we want to increase that in areas that I'll mention later. So in that case, we are encouraging American and European partners to get together in joint proposals which are evaluated by both sides, and where the Europeans are funded by the European Union and the Americans are funded by the US agencies and departments. Okay, so where can we provide funding for US researchers and organizations in collaborative projects? One, where they're identified in the work programs which describe the topics and the areas we'll be funding on a 2-year basis. These work programs, so the current work program is for 2014-2015, the next one will be 2016-2017. If those work programs state that US partners can be funded on a routine basis, then that happens. So pay attention to the core documents. But where that happens routinely is in the area or in the societal challenge, health, demographic change, and well-being. So those of you who are health researchers and responding as part of a consortium to that part, if your consortium is chosen, if your bid is chosen, you as a US researcher will receive funding. Okay, we also reserve the right in circumstances where US organizations are not automatically eligible for funding. We reserve the right to provide that funding. And that funding we may justify on the basis of the excellence of the project and our the recommendation by the experts that will do the evaluation, and the interests of the European Union in having that project and that partner funded. So we do reserve that right, but it's exceptional. It happened in the 7th Framework Programme more than you might expect. So quite a number of US partners receive funding under that basis, but it's not a basis on which we would recommend that US organizations enter consortia to respond to bids, because that funding may not materialize in that fashion. So you do need to be prepared to come with your own funding, and that's what we would encourage you to do. So the third circumstance where we might fund US researchers would be if there's a specific agreement to do so. There is an EU-US cooperation agreement for science and technology which does not stipulate that. That's not to say that it couldn't do in the future. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I know that some of you are in citrus and are engaged in health research. It's a big thing. I wanted to give you an example in the health area, and also examples in the IT area, the Information and Communications and Technologies area. The ICT area first. There is a call that's just opened a week ago. So in the ICT area, under industrial leadership and leadership in enabling industrial technologies. So these are some of the topics, and I know that some of these topics are interesting to Citrus and to the University of California more widely. And this is actually, I haven't listed all of the topics under the call. There are some that I left out simply in order not to, in order to fit some in, so that you could read it. So these are some examples. What would I highlight? Big data. At a presentation this morning in meeting with some of the Citrus faculty and UC Berkeley researchers, big data was mentioned. For health, data analytics. Robotics was mentioned. Let's see. Boosting public sector productivity, again in the health area, that could be very important. So I think there's probably no area that's not of interest for Citrus and for the University of California system. Budget of over $700 million, as you can see, available for that. For this particular area under industrial leadership, US researchers and organizations would not be automatically eligible for funding. You would be automatically eligible for funding under any health calls. This is one health call, one set of topics, but there are others commanding larger amounts of money that will also be available in 2015, and I'll tell you where you can look for those quite soon, in a few minutes. Okay, let me say something about the fact that the US is already a very important collaborator in European-level projects like the 7th Framework Programme. I wanted to just give you a flavour of that. So in the predecessor program to Horizon 2020, we have over 500 instances of participation in collaborative projects in a signed contract. And in addition to that, there are a lot of collaborations that are actually more informal than that. In terms of the Marie Curie actions, now called the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions that I mentioned, something like 800 instances of participation in the networks and fellowships that are available there. And as I said, for the European Research Council grants, although the numbers are relatively low, 45% of all non-Europeans are US participants. And word is spreading. So something that you really want to look at. In terms of collaborative projects, health, as you might expect, is the single most popular area because we're funding US researchers. But ICT, food agriculture, fisheries and biotechnology are also among those. The success rate for collaborative projects involving US partners is above 25%, which is pretty healthy, particularly in current times when budgets are short. We expect that to be pretty much the case in Horizon 2020. And under the previous program, the total funding provided is over $100 million to US partners. There's scope for that to grow under Horizon 2020. So I'm going to stop soon, just to say some areas that you might want to particularly look out for where we want to encourage participation, particularly with US researchers. It's marine and Arctic research, health research, advanced materials, and transportation, particularly surface transport. I mentioned that we're trying to move more and more towards collaboration between, at programmatic level, between agencies on the US side and the European Commission. And one example is the cooperation between the European Research Council and the National Science Foundation, which provides for existing career awardees of the National Science Foundation to be given a grant to travel, some top-up funds to travel to Europe to work with grantees of the European Research Council. We are also working with NSF to actually be able to support earlier stage researchers as well. So, I'm coming to the end of this part of my presentation. Before I hand over to Mike to tell you a little bit about how the University of California likes to approach its collaboration with us. But in the next portion, I will say how you will apply. You will need to find a relevant call. For those parts of the program where you need partners, I will tell you some of the best ways to find partners. You will submit your proposal online, electronically, and we very much encourage you to get involved. So, and at that point, I shall hand over to Mike Kuziak.
Thanks. My name is Michael Kuziak. I'm from the Office of the President. I work in an organization called Research Policy Analysis and Coordination. About a year and a half ago, I was at a presentation with Errol, and I was the guy in the audience who just kept on asking questions about how this European research enterprise works and how we at the University of California could better work with it. Our role at the Office of the President, in my group specifically, is to help empower our sponsored projects, contract and grants offices. So we have a representative here, Joe Baldwin from the Sponsored Projects Office at Berkeley, to help them synthesize and understand the competing rules that we have to deal with when we're dealing with research agreements. And one challenge that we've had with the European funded programs is that you're dealing with a different type of law, you're dealing with different intellectual property regimes, and issues that are tough for us to synthesize in a very quick way when you look at the competing University of California issues that we have as a public research university. So I just have a few comments about some of the challenges and some of the reasons why you really should be looking to the EU for potential funding. So we have seen a trend at the University of California, a decline in federal research. Our research enterprise is about $5.2 billion. Keep in mind the University of California operating budget for the 10 campuses is about $24 billion. So research is a significant part of what we are, and research represents $5.2 billion. But something that we've noticed, particularly when it peaked in the 90s through today, is just a decline in the value of federal research. If there are some young investigators here who've attempted to apply for an R01 or who've applied to NSF, the pay lines, the success rates are much lower than they used to be, and it's a real challenge. So we saw the height of the 90s up to about 70% of our research budget was from the federal government. There was really no need to sort of look to other sources. Last fiscal year, it was about 57% came from the federal government. That leaves about 43% that is a mixture of the state of California. That's very familiar with folks here in Citrus, Caltrans in particular, and other sources, foundations. We've seen we are working more and more with foundations and nonprofits. And while in the federal government, we've seen a lot of standardization of terms, a real spirit of let's make things easier to work with the federal government. As we're working with more nonprofits, more foundations, more international governments, that while we've saved some time with our federal partners, it becomes a challenge because now you're dealing with a lot of different cultures of contracting and implementing research agreements. So one of the tensions I noted, and I think everyone can speak to, is biomedical inflation in particular with our smaller federal appropriations. An R01 today doesn't, on the NIH side, so an R01 is a standard NIH research grant. It doesn't have the buying power that it used to have a decade ago. NIH has been talking about that, and I know a lot of our partners in DC have been advocating for greater appropriations in the federal budget. So another thing when seeking international funding that is a real tension are intellectual property concerns. We get phone calls about, what am I supposed to do about the part of the research agreement that talks about the King of the Belgians? Because there are instances where we have to accept foreign law or are compelled or asked to accept foreign law, and it has liability provisions in there, which it's a cultural exercise. It's learning about another country and learning about their different legal regimes. Cost recovery is a big issue for us at the University of California, particularly in the past few years following the Great Recession. It was bad. It was really bad. And one thing that's really kind of interesting walking onto the side of campus, on the north side of campus today, is just seeing all the renewal in our buildings here. But cost recovery for our research agreements is important because it maintains these buildings. It ensures that we can actually implement the science that we want to do as a part of our mission. And we have a tough time, so accounting standards can be different, terms can be different, and having a frank conversation with some of our international sponsors and some of our European Union colleagues can be tough. And as I pointed out, we have complexity in negotiating terms with more and more non-federal sponsors. So while we have made things a lot easier on the federal side, where we just can accept certain agreements without really worrying about it, now that we have more instances of other non-federal sponsors, it just creates more of a learning curve. One thing that I was reading the New York Times last week and saw the UCSB gift. I don't know if you saw that $65 million gift. About what really stuck out to me there, it's to support its physics institute down there, the Kavli Physics Institute. And it talked about intellectual cross-pollination. And with all my conversations with Errol and others associated with the European Commission, it really has been at the core of that, sort of the premise of what these European Union programs are about. It's connecting scientists together in one room to get them to think, to get them to come up with new ideas. And one of the big pushes for this big gift down at UCSB is to build a dormitory. So these visiting scientists can show up. And a great quote in there was talking about how sometimes the biggest science can happen over a barbecue. And I think in many ways that's the spirit, that's the esprit de corps of a lot of the EU programs. I wish I had remembered the citation, but I was reading something about prior to World War II, there was like this disengagement among the scientific community. You really saw a disconnection among international large science. And you have to remember when working with the EU, and I tell people about why does the EU exist? And why do they behave that way? Why do they want you to spend 2 years in this country and 2 years in that country and have a Slovenian on the team and an Estonian and a German? Why do they want that? Well, it's consistent with their public policy. It's consistent with the notion of building a common market and creating interdependency. And I think that's something to be very mindful of when trying to work with the EU and what the intention is there. And it's not to make it complex for the purpose of complexity, but it's to create interdependence. And I think some of your slides really spoke to the potential of the EU and some of what's coming out of there. So we see this. So at the Office of the President, we don't do what Joe Baldwin does on a daily basis generally. We're not negotiating contracts directly with our sponsors. One of the biggest challenges we face in dealing with the European Commission, or indirectly, are the Marie Curie actions, the Marie Skłodowska actions. Thank you. So Poland ascended to the European Union, and that's during the time that the Marie Curie program was originally created. So now that they're in it, that's why they added Skłodowska. So I cannot say that. And Skłodowska, and I have the Polish last name. It's kind of embarrassing. But just remember that I think there's a huge opportunity there. We haven't seen much of the Office of President level because mainly our data doesn't really reveal this too easily. In terms of international research funds, they're there. They're for you to go and get them, and we think they're a huge opportunity. And I think there's a lot of networks already in place, particularly here at Citrus, to help leverage those. But I think it's important to remember that just because they are there, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will make up for the NIH or the NSF, particularly if you're a young scientist and where are you in your career. I think they're a wonderful supplemental program for many here, and I think particularly through our Gray Davis Institutes here, that there's a huge opportunity to leverage those networks and match them to some of the opportunities at the EU level. The most common way to date that the University of California has interacted with the EU has been through the Marie Curie actions. And that's been a bit of a challenge. We're working on that. We're working collaboratively as an institution. And I kind of see the Marie Curie actions as a really great investment. So for anyone here who runs a lab, it's actually an interesting way to sort of expand your network and to possibly lead to that first ERC grant in a few years after you have a collaborator who is ensconced in the EU. Another opportunity would be to become a reviewer. That is an option. I keep on telling folks, if you want to build a network with the EU and consider getting a grant, become a reviewer. And the ERC does have a way of getting involved. And I really like their little logo. I noticed that, supporting top researchers from anywhere in the world. And that's pretty consistent with what our NSF and NIH also do. They just look at the science. And more so than NSF, the ERC really is not really prescriptive in terms of how it funds projects. The NSF, NIH are sort of chopped up in different directorates and programs. So there's a lot of opportunity there for creative science. I do want to remind everyone that national research schemes still exist within the EU. I think Errol was saying that the R&D programs of the EU represent about 10% of what's going on. I mean, but there's still a Germany, there's still France, there's still a Netherlands, there's still a Norway. They all have their national programs achieving their own gains. So even within the EU, this isn't the primary source of research funding, and it's probably not going to be the primary source of funding here. But it's certainly at the core of it is a way to, I think, leverage a lot of the collaborations that already exist. And that was something that really came out to this morning's conversation when we were sitting with some of the science officers from the consulants and some of the leaderships from Citrus, that there's probably a lot of pre-existing collaborations that could really take off with some additional support. So that's it with regards to my slide. What we are continuing to do, and we hope to have some resolution in the early new year, is how, as a university, do we approach the Marie Curie Fellows? Because by and large, they are the largest percentage of EU collaborations. And we hope once we have clarity there that helps us tackle these other larger issues with working with the EU. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mike. I'm very conscious that I want to give you a chance to ask some questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you know about how to apply, and then allow you to ask any questions that you want about how this all works and how you can get involved. So I'm going to spend 5 minutes or so to explain that and let you know where you can go for further information. So if you want to apply, it's all done online. And the website you need is the one highlighted in orange. It's the Horizon 2020 participant portal. I'm hoping that you will all be able to get access to this presentation, perhaps via the Eventbrite site or
let me just say one thing about the portal. When you're submitting applications, you are submitting them. The University of California submits your applications. It's always important to remember that it's an institutional relationship. One thing that we were able to get the commission to help us out on for the Marie Curie actions is to create a requirement that those fellows check in with us and get institutional endorsement before submission. We had problems when we implemented our federal program called grants.gov, where a lot of our principal investigators would go out and register with the system. So if you register with the system, you're registering as an individual. Please make sure you're not registering as the University of California, because that's a big issue.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I'm just going to follow up on what Mike said there, because the University of California system is already registered in the Horizon 2020 program and was in the 7th Framework Program. That takes a lot of burden off you when you're applying. So all you need to do, we do require each organization to have a unique identification number called a PIC, P-I-C. University of California already has one. So when you if you find and use that, and you can search for it and find it pretty easily on the participant portal, if you put that in when you're making your application, it pre-fills a lot of your forms for you. So.
And we are developing a public-facing website that talks about the University of California's relationship with the EU. I realize I should just stand right here.
Yeah, it's a good idea. And you will, when you're applying, you will need to have a personal account on the participant portal, but it will be linked to the University of California identification code. But all you need to do really is follow the online manual. Now, if you're applying as part of a consortium, one of the consortium members will be the coordinator, who actually is the organization and the individual who actually submits the bid on behalf of the whole consortium. So if you're not the coordinator, then your job will be to contribute your part of the proposal and make sure that you have an account and that you've submitted any of the administrative steps required for you. But a lot of the onus is on the coordinator to make sure that all the parts of the bid are together and submit that online. So, having said that, you can act as a US organization or individual as a coordinator with or without funding, but whether you would choose to do so in circumstances where you're not expecting to get funding is a question that you'd have to consider. So, very simply, the process is that you will need to identify the calls that you are interested in putting a bid for, whether they are as individuals or under the European Research Council grants or as an organization under the collaborative projects, for example. So, look out for the publication of the calls. The deadlines are generally something like 4 months in the future. You will submit your proposals online. The evaluation is done by independent experts. It's not done by me or my colleagues. What we do is select a panel of experts from a database, which you are welcome to sign up to. So those of you who have expertise, knowledge, interest in a particular topic, you can, as Mike says, sign up as experts. Where experts need to be brought together for evaluations, your expenses will be covered. So it might be a good way to go and see Brussels if you've never been there.
Great chocolate.
Great chocolate, great fries, great beer. Okay, anyway. So, you will, within 5 months of our target is that within 5 months of the close of the deadline, you will know whether you've been successful in a collaborative project or not. And if, as a member of the consortium, we would expect each consortium member to sign a grant agreement, and that process may take up to 3 months. So from time of the close of the deadline, we're talking about 8 months, but I think I have a slide that says that anyway. So something you need to be aware of for collaborative projects is that we do have a requirement for a minimum of 3 partners from different EU member states or countries associated. As Mike says, not just to be complicated, we encourage consortium bids under the 2 of the 3 pillars of the Horizon 2020 program because we are trying to encourage transnational research. We are creating a European research area where knowledge and ideas and people and funding do flow as freely as possible. And so for our collaborative projects, we require a participation of at least 3 EU member states or countries associated to the program, like Iceland or Norway or Turkey, etc., etc. And the countries that are in that category are listed on the participant portal. You can find that. In total, we're talking about 40 countries in all. So in addition to those minimum 3 partners, you can have as many other partners, international or European, as you want. Of course, for the European Research Council grants, I already said those are for individuals, so individuals apply, and also for some schemes under the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions. You will find a call for proposals, and you will apply as an individual to that call. In some cases, depending on the particular scheme, with a host institution in mind that you will need to have contacted before, although you may not necessarily have to have all of the details sorted out. What you wouldn't need to show is that European institution is interested in hosting you if you're successful. So, I included this slide just to let you know that for those organizations that cannot sign the grant agreement or really choose not to, you can participate without signing the grant agreement, but then you do so as what's called a third party. A third party doesn't have all the rights and responsibilities as a participant that signs the grant agreement, and we would recommend that you sign the grant agreement because that comes with certain, let's say, rights and protections. But you can do so if, for example, you're an organization, and this is the case with some federal organizations, some government departments and agencies, if they cannot subject themselves to a foreign jurisdiction or foreign law in the rare event of a dispute between the European Commission and that organization, if they can't submit themselves to that, then they may choose not to sign the grant agreement and can participate as third parties.
And for the most, so what we're trying to figure out at that research administration and policy level, we're trying to standardize and have a common approach in some of the terms and conditions. Where it's a challenge at times with these agreements is that it's an intersection with these sort of EU ideals plus national law. And maybe we've never worked for Slovenia before, and we haven't seen those terms and conditions. So that does sort of, at times, makes it tougher to sort of just completely sign off on agreements like this. Jill Baldwin has something.
Can I say, for the most part, we've been accepting formal and jurisdiction. It may require some informed participation
Right.
by the department, because there could be, in the unlikely event anything ever happens, and there could be some financial liability that the university doesn't cover, but by and large, that's where that used to be a very big issue. It's not really a big issue.
Good.
Yeah, certainly our experience in our programs is that the possibility is vanishingly small. Any problems or disputes, but even so, lawyers will want to consider all possibilities.
Yep.
So, something important in terms of finding partners. So, for the consortium-based bids, we find that there's less of a culture in the United States of putting bids, answering a single solicitation as a consortium. And so I think it's important to give you advice as to how do you find partners. Like Mike says, the best way is actually to leverage your existing partnerships. Many of you already have collaborations, contacts, relationships with European organizations, European researchers. Always look to them first. They may well have experience already and are quite likely to have experience, either them as individuals or their organizations, in submitting bids to European Union level programs. So use existing partners, especially where they have experience. If you're approaching this fresh and you're looking to find partners where they don't exist for you, or you don't have existing contacts, there is an online partner search facility on the participant portal, which you can use. Also on the participant portal, which I haven't listed here, is also website addresses for what are called national contact points. In all of the EU member states and associated countries, there is a network of individuals who are responsible for the different aspects of the Horizon 2020 program, who can provide advice and who can also help you to find partners in that particular country where they are national contact points. We have actually networks of national contact points not only in the EU member states and associated countries, but also in our international partners. The US, among our developed country partnerships, is an exception in that we don't have any NCPs, but we are working on that, and I think that we are making a lot of progress in the establishment, which we hope will happen next year, of a network of US-based national contact points who will be able to help with that. They may be, some NCPs are dedicated to sort of legal and financial issues, some are dedicated to thematic topics or particular schemes like the Maria Skłodowska-Curie actions or the European Research Council grants. We are looking to establish that in the United States, but we're not there yet. But if you're looking for partners in particular countries, if you think, oh, Germany is particularly strong in that area, maybe there are partners there. If you approach the national contact points in Germany, they may be able to help you find partners. So, the partner search facility allows you to put your profile up and make requests, and also for other people to find you, and the national contact points can work on your behalf. Okay, number 3.
Don't do that, because we've already done that at the University of California, right? we've created an account and registered our organization. Is that speaking
Oh
of
no, I wasn't
institutional
talking
level?
about. Oh, I see. Yes. Okay. Registering organization. Yes. Yes. But I haven't gotten to there yet.
Okay.
So when I said number 3, sorry, it's the 3 under how you find a partner.
Okay.
Sorry, the third tick. Search the Cordis database. Cordis, if you use a search engine, enter Cordis, you will have access to a database. There is a link to the Cordis database from the participant portal also, which is a database containing all of the research projects we have funded at European level, going back to the 5th framework program.
Yeah.
So we've had the 5th framework program, the 6th framework program, 7th framework program, now the Horizon 2020 program. There are tens of thousands of projects which you can search by theme, by country, by scheme, if you like, or an initiative under the EU research programs. You will be able to access information about the projects that we've funded. Nearly all the projects have their own websites. You can find the partners, you can engage with them because you find you have a common interest to work together. Something else I've noticed a lot is that a lot of people are using social media in order to actually find partners for the Horizon 2020 program. And so that's something you could also look to. So how to apply? So you found your call for proposals on the participant portal. You've found your partners. You will need to create an account, a personal account, so that you can participate. For you as University of California researchers, I underline, you do not need to register your organization because the University of California is already registered. Happy?
Yeah, no, given how many times I've had to fix that account, yes.
Okay. And yes, you will submit your proposal by the deadline. So, pay attention to the documents. There are documents on the participant portal, also on a general overview site of Horizon 2020, which I'll show you in a moment. Read the work programs, read the documents. They will give you a guide as to what's expected, what the topic is. This is for the collaborative projects I'm talking about. For the European Research Council grants, you can submit something on any topic, as I said. Also for the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, the networks that are formed can be in any topic. For the collaborative projects, the call specifies what the challenge is, what we're looking for, what sorts of sums of money we might be talking about, and when those projects will be open when the solicitations will be open. So, read the documents. The criteria for evaluation: excellence, impact, and the quality of the consortium and the organization of the project. This is for collaborative projects. So excellence has always been something that we've insisted on. The impact of the research is something we've long insisted on. And for those projects which have a more innovation flavor, which are closer to market, the impact of the research will actually have a greater weighting. So again, look for what the call is asking for. And you need to have a credible consortium. There are some myths that abound about who you need to have. You need to have a participant from a small country or from an eastern country or from a southern country. No. We ask the evaluators to look at what makes sense to actually address this call. Are the partners here the credible ones? Can they produce the goods? Do they have the track record? Does this look like a project that between partners who can deliver, or is it something that's just been cobbled together to answer a minimum requirement? So that's something you need to look at. For the European Research Council grants, there is one criterion, and that's excellence. Excellence of the idea and of the researcher. Okay. So, funding rates. Per project, it's either 70% or 100% of eligible costs. 100% normally, but for those activities, those projects which we want to fund, which are nearer to market innovation, they command a 70% funding rate. There is a single flat rate for overheads of 25%, which might make some US organizations wince, but what we fund as direct eligible costs is actually broader than what is typical for a US federal agency, for example. So I have it as anecdotal evidence that from research administrators in the US, that's actually more equivalent to something like 40%. So we will fund things like the costs of actually protecting your intellectual property. That's actually a direct eligible cost, and so we will fund that. And that's something that's not typically funded by US agencies. So actually that just says the same thing. And I already mentioned that we have a maximum time to grant a target of 8 months. Since the Horizon 2020 program is new, I can't say whether we're meeting that target or not, but that's what it looks like. 5 months from the close of the deadline to knowing whether you've been successful in your proposal, and 3 months for everyone to sign up and to look after any additional legal details. Intellectual property rights, always an issue. Our general principle is that the ownership of the knowledge generated belongs to the consortium. And the consortium, we encourage to have an agreement amongst themselves as to what intellectual property they're bringing, what happens to the intellectual property that's generated. We don't get involved in that. We expect the partners to share it as they see fit, to exploit and disseminate, and we have a general policy for, in terms of scientific publication, to have the results of those available since they're from public funding. But of course, that's taking into account, of course, the patenting that you might need to do in order to, or the other protection you create for your intellectual property. I'm going to finish and say that there are some other things and websites that you could access that will be of interest to you, and I will mention three of those. The expert database was already mentioned by Mike and myself. Encourage you to take a look, encourage you to sign up as experts. It's a way of learning how the program works, making contacts, and as I say, you might get a trip to Brussels or two. Okay, Euraccess North America is a service which is funded by the European Commission. There are 2 people looking after, in the Western Washington, D.C., looking after the US and Canada, who are networking the US-based researchers who are either Europeans who want to network amongst themselves, or US-based researchers interested in opportunities in Europe, job opportunities, research opportunities. Often the calls for proposals, including in the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions and the European Research Council grants, are published on the Euraccess website as well as on our Horizon 2020 participant portal. So that's a source of opportunities for you that I encourage you to take a look at. Destination Europe. This is an initiative to publicize, to promote Europe as an attractive place to do research and as an attractive place to have links and contacts. Now, as well as advertising Horizon 2020 and the schemes at European level, it's a platform where we work together with the individual EU member states so that they can also showcase what's available in their individual countries. Just over a week ago, we had a Destination Europe event in Atlanta, Georgia, where the Belgians, the French, the Germans, the Swedish, the Irish, and, oh, forgive me who I've forgotten, also showed what opportunities were available in those countries, and how you could participate and what the conditions were in the country in general, and what assistance you can have in making your links. So the next Destination Europe event will take place in San Jose in California on the 15th of February of 2015. It's at the beginning of the AAAS annual meeting. So that's San Jose, 12th of February, 2015. It's the first, more or less the first full day of the annual meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. I'm going to stop there and take any burning questions that you may have if there's time.
Thank you, Errol, first. So we have time for just maybe 1 or 2 questions, and I want to also recognize and thank Jill Baldwin for being a local expert on the UC Berkeley campus, who could also serve as a resource for answering some of our particular questions.
So, one here and then another.
Probably going to be a minority question, but I'm here from Arts and Humanities.
Can you use the mic, please?
On your portal,
You have a microphone.
I'm here from Arts and Humanities, and I noticed on your expert portal that it says social sciences and humanities, but
Yes.
the words humanities hasn't been mentioned at all. So since it's my own particular reason for being here, I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yes, we do support in the Horizon 2020 program the social sciences and humanities. The European Research Council grants don't specify which topics you can address. If you have a great idea in whatever area, social sciences and humanities included, submit your idea. About 20% of the grants
numbers of grants that are given under the European Research Council go to social sciences and humanities. Under the social societal challenges, there is a theme, inclusive, innovative societies. I haven't quite said the title correctly, but that's dedicated to the social sciences and humanities. Also, we mainstream social sciences across the themes. We encourage the consortia that are formed to address the social dimensions of their research, and so to include social scientists where appropriate. So that's what part of the interdisciplinarity that we're trying to encourage.
I have several questions. One is whether LBNL is included in the UC framework in this sense of registered participant.
Theoretically, it should be a part of it. We're trying to resolve it.
So it's still being resolved.
Right now, there is a separate one for LBNL. They got their own about 6 or 8 months ago, and the help desk in Brussels didn't really resolve it for us. So that's a conversation to have with Errol, I think. We'll talk about that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I had already noted was about the BILAT program that you then did not mention at the end. So could you please say a little bit about it, how applicable it is?
I'd be happy to. I only cut it short because I wanted to give you the chance to ask questions, so you asked a question about BILAT. That's perfect. Under the 7th Framework Programme, the predecessor to Horizon 2020, we funded a project involving European and American partners dedicated to promoting research cooperation between American scientists and innovators and European ones. So that's called the BILAT USA 2.0 project. 2.0 because there was a previous incarnation of that project, and we expect there to be a third incarnation in the Horizon 2020 program. So typically a project of 3 years, something like that, with a number of partners. On the US side, it includes the National Council for University Research Administrators, NCURA. So they are a project partner. There are other American partners who, together with Europeans, host a number of events, initiatives. They host a website. They gave you the address, which highlights some of the opportunities for collaboration, advertises calls.
It's trying to demystify what are these EU research programs for the American research enterprise.
Yeah, and looking at the whole framework conditions for that collaboration and how they could be improved, they help us to do that. Yep. So and they can be, it's the nearest thing we have to a US national contact point. And in fact, as a pilot, we are looking at NCURA to perhaps be the first US national contact point. But that's something, as I say, we're still developing. So.
Thank you. And with energy, and in particular renewable energy being one of the issues high on the agenda in Europe, has it been one of the priority areas identified for cooperation specifically with the US?
Right. Under the EU-US Science and Technology Cooperation Agreement, these are great questions, by the way, we identified at the last meeting under that agreement 4 priorities that I mentioned. Energy wasn't specifically one of those, but energy has been a long-running priority for transatlantic cooperation in the form of the EU-US Energy Council, which has met more or less on an annual level at the level of the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Energy on the US side, so at the moment Moniz and Kerry, with the High Representative and Vice President for European Defence and Security Policy on our side, and the Commissioner for Energy. Also the Commissioner for Research used to be involved. But under that collaboration, there are 3 working groups, one looking at energy security, another looking at the energy policy in terms of, for example, the policy related to the development of renewables and their dissemination in the market and those conditions. And the third being dedicated to the research and innovation cooperation in the transatlantic space. Under that, there are some priorities for collaboration like hydrogen fuel cells and materials for renewable energy
technologies. So, and in fact, under the materials, I said that there were four, under the cooperation agreement, there are four priorities that we have: marine, health, transport, and materials. The materials component of that actually has been dedicated largely to research for renewable energy technologies, in fact, critical materials, for example. So we're talking about substitution, efficient use, efficient mining, and areas like that related to development of clean energy technologies. Carbon capture and storage.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to bring the proceedings this afternoon to a close. If you have further questions, I imagine that Errol and Michael would be happy to answer those. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.